In this lesson, we're going to learn the movement of the knight or horse, another way of calling this piece. Now, the knight is a very special piece because it has a way of moving that is very different from the rest of pieces. It can jump, and that gives a special way of moving that makes it a bit more difficult to learn, but at the same time very exciting to move. Now, as we can see, have a knight on e4, and we marked in green color the arrows to the squares where it can jump to. As you can see, it can't move to the squares which are adjacent to the knight. These squares are not allowed to be moved to, but it can move to all these squares which are 2 squares away and a radius around the knight. And the knight will always jump to the square which is of a different color to where it stands. If it's standing on a light square, then it will always jump to a dark square. It's normally 2 squares forward and 1 square to the right or to the left. Let's carry on looking at this from the starting position. Now, as you can see in the diagram, pieces are on their starting squares and none of the pieces can move because there are pawns in front of all them. However, the knight has this special ability to jump over both his own pieces and his opponent's pieces. So, as you can see, the knight can now go to the squares f3 or h3. These are the 2 squares it can go to, whereas the knight on b1 can go to the squares c3 or a3. We'll see later on that it's much better to go to the center squares, but for now, suffice to say that we can jump to both of these squares. To be more precise, the knight doesn't actually move like the arrow, but it moves without trajectories, so it actually just jumps right over the pawns to one of these squares. Let's try to do the move knight f3, and as we can see, we can move the knight that jumps over the 2 pawns and situate itself already in a center square. And now, in this diagram, we're going to see another special ability of the knight, which is the double attack. So the knight on e4 can go to any of the squares that are marked with the green arrows, but one of these squares is especially interesting. If we move the knight to g5, it automatically threatens both the king, which is doing a check at this moment, but also it's attacking the black rook on h3. So this is called a double attack. As there's check, we call it a double check, and it's a very powerful weapon because now the king must move. Let's say it goes to g6, and now the knight, although it can go to many other squares as you can see marked by green, the best square to go is h3, and that would allow us to capture the rook, and we would now have a knight and a king against the king, which, as we will see in the next lesson, is a draw because there's not enough material to do checkmate. But at least we've gotten back a rook, which was disadvantage of material. The knight still can move to the 3 green squares on its next move. It can't obviously jump on his own king. So let's say the king moves forward. And now, as you can see, we have several squares to go to. 2 of them are not so good because the g5 and f4 squares would be next to the black king and he would capture the knight. But we can go to the f2 square, which is the movement that allows us good trajectory in our next move. Join me and my friends at chessclub.com. Download the ICC app or visit our website to play online with us.